Hello everybody, welcome to this webinar on the farming offer in 2024 delivered by the Farming Advice Service on behalf of DEFRA. I'm Laura Harpham, the Programme Manager for the Farming Advice Service, and I'll be hosting today. I'm joined by DEFRA Farming and Countryside Director Janet Hughes and the Policy Lead on the Sustainable Farming Incentives, Jonathan Marsden. This webinar is in collaboration with DEFRA and the RPA, as well as the Farming Forum, and we have a team of colleagues available to explain the offer and answer your questions in the Q&A chat, as well as a live Q&A with Janet and Jonathan after a run-through of the latest announcements. Just to manage expectation, although we would love this webinar to serve as a second Oxford Farming Conference, there won't be any major new policy announcements this morning. We'll do our best to provide some clarity and a useful discussion on the detail around SFI and the announcements earlier in the month. And we know people are keen to hear further details on those. We'll share as much as is known and is confirmed, and hopefully some indication of timelines. And there will, of course, be further detail rolled out as we go through the spring and into the summer. And we'll answer as many questions as we can in the Q&A. We will also be pulling questions from the Farming Forum thread, and that was open a couple of weeks before the webinar. So we've had a bit of an advance warning of the particular things that people have questions about. As I said, we have a team of DEFRA and RPA colleagues working with us in the background on this webinar. So if they can answer any questions as they go, they will post responses into Slido as well. And this should hopefully mean that we can focus on those that need to come to Janet and Jonathan in the live Q&A. If we can't get to all of the questions today, the Farming Forum and the DEFRA blog team have also kindly agreed to address popular unanswered questions in posts on their pages following the event. So we're hoping to cover all our bases for you today. If there are questions specific to your own situation or an application, a direct query to the RPA SFI team is probably your best option. And the link to the page with those contact details, telephone number and email address is also going in the chat now. So without further ado, I will close my screen and hand over to Janet and invite you to kick things off, please.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Laura. And thank you ever so much, everybody, for dialing in. My name is Janet Hughes. If you haven't met me before, I'm the Director of the Farming and Countryside Programme here in DEFRA, the absolute best job in the civil service and arguably the public sector by a country mile, in my view, because we get to work with farmers and we get to try and make things work for farmers, and we have the opportunity here to do something really useful for all of you, we hope. So we really hope this morning that we'll be able to answer some of your questions, and we've seen the ones that have already come up on Slido, and we've all come ready to work through those for you, and we're happy to help with any of the others as well. I thought it might be helpful if I gave a bit of an overview about what we're doing for those not already familiar with the programme, and also my colleague Jonathan Marsden is going to talk you through what is actually coming this year that's new. You must excuse my wall of mess behind me, by the way. Don't judge me. I try and keep my room tidy, but I'm a bit busy with work. Right, so the context, first of all, the first thing to say is that we in DEFRA have been spending a lot of time getting out and about, talking to farmers, visiting farms, listening to what you've got to say. Some of our team were out at an auction mart yesterday, just for example, and learning about the context that you're operating in, because we understand that we have not done that enough in the past. And as a result, some of the things that we design and deliver are not going to work for you unless we understand the context that you're operating in. And we know that you are facing the impacts of climate change whilst also being blamed for it. You are seeing huge fluctuation in inputs and output prices. You are under pressure from all angles in terms of the supply chain and producing food, and also playing the vital role that you play in your communities. And we really understand and respect that. And we are going a long way to try to change our culture in our organisation to make sure that we all are understanding and respecting that, and trying to do things that are going to actually work for you and your business, because if what we're doing doesn't work for you and your business, then it doesn't work at all. So that's the first thing to say. What we're trying to achieve through these reforms, which are the biggest reforms in 70 years in agricultural policy in England, and we know that that's a massive change for everybody, and we need to take that responsibility very deeply, and we do. And what we're trying to achieve is three sets of things. We're trying to maintain domestic food production and security, which is really important, as we all know. We're also trying to help improve farm productivity and ensure that there's an opportunity for all farm businesses to be viable and profitable. And we're also trying to achieve some really ambitious outcomes for the environment and climate in terms of biodiversity, water quality, air quality, carbon emissions, and dealing with flooding and drought and the impacts of climate change. And we're trying to do those things all at the same time. So we're not asking you to choose between food production and the environment. What we're trying to do is offer a range of ways for you to help make your farm more efficient and profitable and productive, and at the same time more resilient and more productive for the environment. And we want to do as much as we can in the sweet spot where we can serve all of those objectives at the same time. And there are many farms already showing how that can be done, but how that can be done varies obviously from farm to farm. Every farm is different. There's no such thing as a typical farm, and it's farmers that have got to decide what's the right combination of things to do on their particular farm. And so we're here to get behind you and not get in your way as you do that. And the way that we're trying to do that is by improving our services to you. And I hope you will have seen in recent years an improvement in the way that services are operated to you by way of making payments more frequently and on time, dealing with queries, dealing with inspections and controls in a more fair and proportionate way, where we're trying to prevent breaches and advise and support you rather than detect and penalise on the assumption that you're trying to do things wrong. And we know that we've got a long history of that approach, and that we've got a big job to do to build trust and confidence in what we're doing and to earn your trust and confidence in what we're doing. And we aim to do that by delivering and showing that we are serious about doing this in a different way. So we're trying to improve both our regulatory services and our schemes to make them more business-like, more trustworthy for you, and not something that you think is a risk, but a benefit to your business. And we're doing that by making them simpler, clearer, faster, and fairer. We've got the range of schemes which we'll go into, but we've got, at the moment, we have the Sustainable Farming Incentive, which is designed for large scale uptake, which is the main thing we're going to talk about today. We have Countryside Stewardship mid-tier and higher tier, and those are designed, higher tier is designed for bespoke agreements which are doing much more complex action in specific areas, which might be higher risk and higher benefit type areas. And the mid-tier is more designed for sort of mass uptake. And one of the things we're going to do this year is combine that mid-tier offer with SFI. And I can see there's a question about that. And some members of the Farming Forum have been asking about this for a long time, and we have been listening. And we think having a separate mid-tier and SFI scheme and service is not helpful. It's too complicated, and we're going to offer all of the actions in those two schemes in a single combined offer this summer. And we'll talk through what that looks like shortly. So we've got our regulatory and service improvements, we've got our schemes, we've also got landscape recovery within those schemes, which is for larger scale, longer term projects, but they do all involve farmers working together. Almost all of them are groups of farmers, including in many cases tenants, working together over up to 20 years or longer period of time. And then finally, we've got our range of grants and support for productivity and innovation and animal health and welfare. And you can find information about all of these if you look at funding for farmers on gov.uk. You can see all that information in the same place. And one of the things we're looking to improve is the way we provide that information to you, because at the moment you'd have to know the name of each grant and the name of each scheme and decide which one you're going to apply for and know when the window is going to be open. And there's an awful lot of bureaucratic complexity there, which is not helpful. So what we're seeking to do is streamline the way we offer all these things to you to make it much easier for you to find what's available, work out what's relevant and useful to you, and access that without having to pay somebody else to do that for you and without having to spend days of your life sweating in front of a computer screen, because not everybody wants to do that, do they? Or indeed has time to do that. So we've got our service improvements, our grants and our schemes. And how we're trying to do this is with farmers. We've been working with thousands of farmers over years to learn what works for you and how can we make these schemes work on your farms. We've had our SFI pilot, which is now in its third year with 850 farmers. We've learned a huge amount from that. We had the early rollout of SFI last year. We learned a huge amount from that, and particularly about the need to just make our schemes really flexible so that you can decide what combinations of things you want to do on your farm, because each farm is different, as I said earlier. And so the offer this year is already much more popular. The offer from 2023, much more popular. It's got 23 actions in it. You can pick whichever ones you want to do in whatever quantities and wherever on the farm you want to do them. And then you can add to your agreement each year. And you can rotate a lot of the options. And within the actions, there's a lot more flexibility than there used to be about how you go about doing them. So instead of us saying you must sow this mix of seeds on this date, which has historically been more the case, now we're saying, please make sure you have winter cover in place over the winter. And you decide what particular specific seed mix and what specific dates are most likely to work for you. That offer is still open for applications. It's open for applications right now, and we've had more than 9,000 already, covering more than 1 million hectares of land. So if you're interested in getting involved, then please do go and have a look online at the SFI offer now. And then when the new actions become available later this year, you'll be able to add those in, either by having an extra agreement or by adding them in on the anniversary of your agreement. We can come into a bit more detail about that if you'd like a bit later on. So that's our kind of what we're doing overall. What we're trying to do this year is improve our service by combining the mid-tier and SFI offers into a single offer where you can log on and see all of it in the same place. We're also doing a lot of work to make it easier to find the bits of the scheme that are most relevant to you, because you might not want to read all 200 actions that are available, to sift out the ones that are most useful to you. So we're doing some research with farmers and some design work to prototype different ways of presenting the information in ways that are going to be easily accessible to somebody without having to pay an agent to interpret it for you. And so you can choose what to do, and then you can add to your agreement each year, as I mentioned. And we're adding in a whole host of new actions, which we've been working on with farmers, practitioners, and other experts over quite a long period of time to pay for a wider range of things for you to do on your farm. So if you're already in a scheme, there will be plenty more for you to do. And the scheme will be open, because I know this is one of the questions, will be open for applications this summer, and we'll publish information about the full details of the scheme, including which things can be combined on the same areas of land, what the specific rules are for each action. We'll publish those in the spring. Now, I realise spring and summer are not very precise dates, and that you do need some precise dates so that you can plan ahead. And we will be publishing those dates shortly. We're not quite ready to do that yet, but we are almost ready to do that. And we know that you need to know that information. So we will provide that very soon. But broadly speaking, there'll be the full details of the scheme will come in the spring, and it will be open for applications in the summer, and it will work like SFI does now. So you apply, once you've accepted your agreement, you start on the 1st of the next month. In respect of higher tier, we will continue to run a separate process for that, because those are bespoke agreements and it's a competitive process, but that will also be open on those same timescales and on a rolling window. So those are the sort of broad timescales for this year and what we're trying to achieve. We've got more actions, better service, more choice, and we've also increased prices for a lot of our actions and added in some premium prices. And if you want to look at the detail of this, we published some information at the beginning of January in our agriculture transition plan update, and the Secretary of State made a speech at the Oxford Farming Conference outlining what we were doing. So we'll post a link to that. In fact, I think it's already there in the chat, so that you can find that and peruse it at your leisure. So that's a kind of overview. It's brilliant to see so many of you on today. Really exciting to have nearly 1,200 farmers all on one call. I don't think we've ever had one quite that big before. So thank you ever so much for dialing in. Really hope we're going to make good use of your time. But this is not the only chance to ask us a question. I'm dead easy to find on the internet. So you can hunt me down and ask me what you like, and you can always get in touch, and we will be publishing more information. There'll be lots more chances to engage with us as time goes by, and we always want to hear from farmers about what you think. So let us know. I'm going to hand over to Jonathan, who's going to give us a bit of an overview of what are the new actions that are coming this year, and then we'll open up for questions, if that's okay, Laura.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you, Jonathan. You have the Zoom spotlight, so please do carry on.
I feel very honoured. Well, good morning, everybody. As Janet says, it's an absolute pleasure to see so many of you here. As Janet mentioned, I've got a few slides I'm just going to go through. These are focused on the new actions, the stuff that we've never really done before or is making a comeback from previous schemes, and also some of the actions that are existing at the moment in schemes, but we've made some quite big changes to them just to sort of give a flavour. So if I can remember how the witchcraft works, I will endeavour to share my screen. Can everybody see that?
First time, spot on. Thank you very much, Jonathan.
Right,
yeah.
Let's see where we get on. So first of all, just a few minutes regarding the new actions regarding precision farming. This is new area, new territory for us. Some of our colleagues on the productivity side are funding this type of equipment, and the first thing to say is we've structured our grants in ELM and the payments that you can see on the screen here in such a way that if you use some of those productivity grants to buy this type of equipment, you can have that capital grant for the kit and also come into our scheme and get the payments for actually using it, deploying it. The next thing to say in this space is we know that this sort of equipment is expensive and often out of the reach of small or medium-sized farms. But also we know a lot of farms in that area rely on contractors. And by offering, and from speaking to the contracting industry, they often struggle to charge extra for the use of this innovative and precision farming equipment. And we're hoping that by putting area-based payments in place, that we make this attractive to far more farmers and growers, and we open up the opportunity for the contracting in of these services, stimulate that sector. The final bit before we get into some of the detail of this is why are we doing precision farming? And this really stems from, as Janet set out, our objectives are for benefiting the environment with these schemes. We've got targets regarding water quality and biodiversity, but also supporting sustainable food production. And there are some real, with precision farming, we can deliver against both of those objectives. A bit of a fact for you to set all this in context. If we look at the data that we get out of the pesticide survey that happens every other year, in this country, there are around 13,000 tonnes of active pesticide ingredient applied to land in England, which is a huge amount. And we know you need to use that to protect crops, etc. But there is now technology and practices that we can work together to reduce the amount that's actually needed. So first of all, if we look at precision application of crop nutrients, what we're looking at here is equipment which varies automatically the application rate of fertilizer within the field in response to the crop needs in that particular bit of the field. So that will be zonal soil testing for your P and K, and the use of remote sensing or equipment to detect the amount of nitrogen that's required. The last three on here are all aimed at reducing the amount of herbicide that's required. So remote or camera controlled spraying technology. Things like just turn compensation on sprays doesn't count for this. This is actually, targeted spraying of the herbicides. And then we've got two actions at the bottom looking at robotic mechanical weeding, and robotic non-mechanical weeding is using lasers and electrocuting the weeds. And those two actions, it's not just about weeding in the rows, it's about weeding between the plants in the rows, to give you some idea of the level that we're looking at for here. Hopefully, if I click that button, maybe not that button, a different one, we will move on. There we go. So moving a change of tack entirely, managing particular species where we've got particular targets. First of all, let's just talk about native breeds. So rare and native breeds are important for us, and they can help where we're managing particular habitats. We've done a lot of work looking at how that works at the moment. It's only available in higher tier, and there's a very limited number of people get access to those payments. And we're wanting to broaden the native breed supplement, the rare and native breed supplements out. So there will be two bands of payment, if you like, for grassland habitats, and then for lowland, heath and moorland habitats, because the stocking rates tend to be very different on those. And then within those payment bands, within those habitat types, there will be banding of the payments based on the proportion of the grazing livestock that are on the rate native and rare breed lists. Those animals that are the types of animals that we're looking for here, it's cattle, sheep, ponies and horses, and if they're on the rare and native list, then they will be eligible for those payments if you meet those grazing requirements. Then moving a little bit away from the native breeds, we've got the invasive species, those species that we need to control because they predate or do damage on other animals, or they damage habitats. And as you can see there, there'll be deer control, control of grey squirrel, mink, and the rather not quite rightly named edible dormouse that makes it sound quite nice and cuddly. It actually, in the southeast, it does an awful lot of damage to native woodlands. Those actions where we're looking at what is essentially lethal control, we will need to control those quite carefully. They will sit, it's likely, in the higher tier. There will need to be a management plan in place. We will need to have looked at what other control measures are available, and if they've not worked, the lethal control is the sort of last resort. And then sitting around that, there will be payments for control of invasive plants and control of bracken and rhododendron. And yes, we are aware we've just lost azulocks from the arsenal regarding bracken. Okay, moving on, if I can make, yes. So on soils, we've already got an offer in SFI regarding soils for testing for organic matter, doing soil plans, winter cover crops, etc. We're adding to that with payments for no-till. We know no-till's not for everybody. And the joy of moving to the pick and mix approaches, if you don't feel it's right for your farm and your situation, then you don't need to do it. It will be no-till in that it will be direct drilling or broadcasting seed. And there will be an allowance if there's a need in a particular situation to do subsoiling, then we've built that into the offer. And then to add to our winter cover crops, we will also be introducing multi-species cover crops for the spring and early summer, and also for the summer, early autumn. So what we would traditionally think of as a catch crop, so planting a cover crop between harvesting one crop and planting the next cash crop. We built it in this way because we know there's a range of different cropping scenarios out there. Obviously, there's the classic one between, harvesting in July, August with the combine, getting some green cover in before you then plant again in the winter. But also there are scenarios, particularly for the veg guys, where this is appropriate earlier in the year. Okay, so scrub is an important habitat for us, and I know as farmers we all tend to think it's messy and untidy, but in terms of a habitat, it is incredibly important. And we've done a lot of work on this, looking at the payment rates, and there'll be two versions of this going forward. One that will sit in the equivalent of our higher tier, but also we're looking at, can we make this available on a more wide scale basis in the structure of SFI, but incredibly important habitat for us, and we just need more of it. Right, looking at the moorland situation, we have done a huge amount of work over the last few years looking at how we can support moorland farmers and the habitats that those moorlands support. We've got a far more nuanced offer than we've had in the past, a lot more flexibility, and the grazing actions that are at the top of the screen there, we're looking to position those in SFI. On the low grazing rates on moorland, we're looking to have 3 bands of payment based on the number of livestock that are up on the moor. And then in addition to that, there will be additional payments if based on the proportion of those livestock that are cattle or ponies. So the more cattle and ponies and the less sheep, there will be supplementary payments for that. In that same space, if the native breeds that we mentioned about earlier, those will also be eligible on the moorland, depending on the breeds of cattle and ponies that you've got and sheep. And then the managed livestock on moorland, this is around a combination of shepherding the livestock while they're on the moor, and also any temporary rest periods where there's no livestock on the moor at all, apart from the ponies. We know it's very difficult to take the ponies off the moor. And you, where it's not triple SI, will be able to pick and choose that combination of actions that best work for you. Just a word on triple SIs and moorland. If it is triple SI, then those grazing actions, you will need to engage with Natural England and agree that grazing regime using those actions and the payment rates, because obviously they need to be able to consent agreements. And then the bottom actions on the page here, these will sit in the higher tier section of the scheme, because as you will see, there's some quite significant payments here, particularly for either re-wetting peat on blanket bog, or if it's already wet, keeping it wet, but also where it's non-peat soils and there are opportunities to keep water on the moor for longer, in terms of particularly trying to prevent downstream flooding. And some of the events we've had recently kind of underline the importance of this. All of that will need a lot of detailed planning and work in terms of potentially feasibility studies, but because there's sums of money involved, and we need to make sure it will work as well. And then also what we're bringing in new are, we know low stocking rates, etc., create fuel load on moorland, and we will be introducing payments for maintaining fire and fuel breaks. Again, those will need to be agreed as part of a moorland restoration plan, a wildfire management plan. Okay. So a little bit about our grasslands then. So obviously in SFI at the moment, we have already got payments for, let's call it productive grassland. So we have got payments for having legumes in grassland, predominantly clovers, the clovers. And we've also got payments for herbal lays, where you create a specific lay habitat with a mixture of species, herbs and clovers, as an alternative to that sort of productive silage crop land, which is probably getting you 200-300 kilos of nitrogen. Those as an alternative to that, the herbal lays can be really, really beneficial. What we've got on the screen at the moment is more for the grassland, what we would call the grassland habitats. So we've got the rough grazing for upland birds, the UP2. The payment rate for that has increased quite significantly over recent years. It's not that long ago where I think we were only paying either 17 or 19 pound a hectare. We're now up to 121. We've done a lot of work on the wet grasslands for our breeding waders and the wildfowl, and those payment rates have increased quite significantly. Those are likely to be actions that sit in stewardship going forward, but we're looking at the opportunities there may be to make that available on a more wide-scale basis. And I suppose that the big one, the standout one, is this managing and creating species-rich grasslands. So the payment rate here has increased massively. I think we've gone from 181 or 2 up to the 646. And we have brought together the creation of species-rich grasslands with the management of them. Historically, there's been quite a big payment for creating species-rich grassland. And then when that agreement's come to an end, we've rewarded you with a lower payment rate just for carrying on the maintenance of it. We brought all that together. So the payment for species-rich grassland is a 646. And there will be additional capital grants available for the one-off costs associated with creating species-rich grasslands. So preparation of the seed bed, buying the seed will be dealt with as a separate capital item. The other change here is at the moment, those species-rich grassland actions have only been available in higher tier. We are looking to make those more available in an SFI situation, but we are likely to need what we would call an endorsement from an advisor to say that it will work if we're creating species-rich grassland, or we know the habitats data layer isn't perfect. So if someone's got species-rich grassland which isn't shown on the priority habitats data layer, then an advisor can pop out and say, yes, this qualifies, and off we go. I will march on because time is moving on. Again, in the grassland space, new offers regarding species-rich floodplain meadows. And again, some significant payment rates there, given the importance of that as a habitat to us. Scrapes and gutters, so there's been capital grants for creating the sort of gullies, the scrapes in wet grasslands for a few years. What we've got on the screen here is an additional new annual payment for managing those scrapes and gutters to make sure they're providing the right habitats for the particularly the breeding waders. Haymaking supplement. This has been in the scheme since the year dot, really. What we've done here, we're introducing two versions of this. So what we've had at the moment is just a single payment rate for a single cutting date, and we've introduced an additional action here with a higher payment rate for a later cutting date. So cutting in sort of July will attract one payment rate, cutting in August will attract a different payment rate, for example. I'm not going to dwell on the rust control supplements, the shepherding and grazing, because I'm conscious we need to leave heaps of time for questions, and I'm starting to ramble. Okay, lowland peat. So this is particularly aimed at peat situations where it's the pumped drainage systems, really, where we've got good control of the water level in those systems. We know if we allow peat to dry out, we get huge emissions of carbon when that peat is cultivated. I think the old saying is, in the fens, you lose the height of a man in the life of a man. And we need to really look and try and address some of the issues that's creating. So we've had the SW17, SW18 in stewardship, not for terribly long, just a few years now, but we've looked at these very hard. We've looked at very low uptake levels that we were getting, the reasons why. And as you can see, we've made quite significant changes to those payment rates. Now, the water levels here, for those high payment rates, it is bringing the water table up to very close to the surface, because that's where we get the maximum reduction in carbon. And we accept that will prevent the vast majority of crops being grown. Not all, but the vast majority. But what the science also tells us, if we can bring that water table up just to a lower level, we still get some benefits. So if it's in the sort of 30 to 50 centimetre level, the water table, then we do still get some reductions in carbon. And actually, there's a far greater range of crops that can still be grown in that situation. So those are the new actions that attract the slightly lower payment rates. All of this will sit in higher tier. There will need to be feasibility studies. You will need to work with your neighbours, because obviously you can't bring the water table up on your field without affecting the fields around about. There will need to be liaison with the EA and internal drainage boards, etc., etc. Okay, on boundaries, so this stuff will all sit in SFI. We've got a good suite of actions in SFI at the moment for hedgerows. There's in here, there will be payments for maintaining dry stone walls. There are already capital grants for restoring dry stone walls, and likewise there will be payments for maintaining earth banks, and in the southwest the stone-faced hedge banks. There will be a new action for ditch management in SFI, which is managing those ditches in a more sensitive way, rather than just clearing out both sides on a fairly regular basis. The payment there, the simple ditch management, is just to do that in a little bit more sensitive way on a rotational basis. And then obviously we know ditches can be incredibly important reservoirs for wildlife and nature. And there will be a higher tier version of the ditch management, for particularly linked in with the wet grassland management, etc. And I am going to stop there, and hopefully whetted everybody's appetite, provoked questions.
Great.
And I will try and stop sharing my screen.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jonathan.
Thank
Laura,
you.
should we go through, sorry, I was going to say, should we go through the questions? We've got plenty of questions and lots of voting, haven't we, on Slido?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, I was just going to congratulate Jonathan on his accidental pun of whetting people's appetite with ditches, but maybe that's just my sense of humour. I apologise. Before we move on to the questions, I just want to mention there was a message that came through from one of the RPA colleagues who raised it to say a couple of people were struggling to see the slides. The team in the background have been putting links into the various options that Jonathan was talking through. So the links to the sections of the gov.uk pages on moorland, upland peat, boundaries, lowland peat pages. Nothing on the slides is secret sensitive information that you'll only be able to access here. So if you haven't been able to see any of those for any reason, my apologies. If it was me getting over excited with the spotlight feature, I can only apologize for that. But all of the information is in the links in the chat, and we will make sure that all of those come out to people afterwards as well.
Yeah, and it's worth saying on that, Laura, we've been doing lots of work to test with farmers what's the best way to present this information, because it's not necessarily a great handbook for everybody. Some people really like that, agents in particular really like that, people who are already very comfortable with schemes like that, but people who are not don't want a great big document, and we have absolutely clocked that, and we've started building a bit more of a checker type thing, so you can say, I'm this kind of farm, I'm interested in these kind of things, which are the actions that are most useful to me. Some of the other things we're looking at doing are things like, here's a starter pack of things, farms like yours, these are the sorts of things people tend to do, the most common actions, things that work together, whatever. You can flex that if you want to, but here's a kind of somewhere to start. So we are working on that with a view to introducing more of that type of functionality from this summer, and we'll carry on building that out, because we do want to make it as easy as possible for people to find what they want without having to read policy documents, which not everyone enjoys as much as I do, I realise.
Yes, absolutely.
So do you want us to start rattling through the, should we do the questions just in order of how many people have asked for the answer on them?
Yes, so I was going to suggest that we alternate between the Slido, which is live, and some of the questions that came through the farming forum, although I can already see that there's a lot of useful crossover. So let's, well, would you like me to select, or would you like
why don't you pick and then we can answer? That sounds fine. Do that.
Okay, so top question in the Slido first of all, which has 48 upvotes, is: do fields need to be mapped as priority habitat on Magic to get the species-rich grassland option? So going straight in with a technical question.
No. Jonathan,
no.
say a little bit more than no.
Yeah, so we know the priority habitats data layer is not perfect. We know there's a lot of grassland habitats out there that aren't on the layer. If your fields or your parcel of land isn't on the map, but you feel it is species-rich grassland, then we're going to bring in this facility for an advisor to come out and endorse, support your applicant, that action on that field, and again to make up for those deficiencies in that data set. So it won't need to be on the data layer to qualify, but it will need to be species-rich grassland or creating the species-rich grassland.
What we'll do is then we'll kind of update the maps on the basis of that in due course, but you won't be delayed in getting in until that happens. And we know there's been some worry about that, but we do try and we try and look at the practicality of these things, and we know that practically, obviously it'd be ideal if we had a perfect map with all the data on it, but we don't, so we can't be restricting people's access on that basis. Go on, next.
Okay,
I was going to go straight into the next question, but sorry, I'll hand back to you and you can tell me what the next one is.
I'm quite happy to hand that over, Janet.
No,
so this one has come from both, which is handy. I don't know if there's a definite answer for this, but I will ask it. When will BPS non-eligible farmers, obviously BPS are now having finished, be able to apply for SFI?
This summer. So this new offer will be open to people who have not been eligible for BPS. BPS has now been delinked, so you won't be making a claim for BPS now this year. So apart from anything else, we can, every year from now on, that is a less and less useful way of doing it, particularly if you're a new entrant who's come in the last couple of years and hasn't claimed BPS or been eligible for it, and that's not fair on new entrants in particular, but also smaller farms who wouldn't have been eligible. So that'll be this year. You can already go into CS if you're not a BPS claimant, but you'll be able to go into SFI as well.
Great. So the next question is about CS, so that's a very handy segue. Thank you. So there's a number of questions along this theme, so I'm going to ask it in a slightly more general way, but we might pick up on a couple of specifics. For those who are already in countryside stewardship, particularly higher level is coming up in the questions. Now the new SFI option appears potentially more attractive. What are the options for coming out of either an agreement or an extension to put those same parcels of land into a different kind, whether it's a new higher tier, a mid-tier, or an SFI?
Yeah, so I think this is about higher level stewardship, isn't it? And increasingly now we're getting asked that question by people in higher level stewardship. A couple of years ago, what people in high level stewardship understandably wanted at that time was a bit more security. So we stopped offering 1-year rollovers and started offering 5-year rollovers to give people certainty that they were going to be able to carry on for that period. What we've now done is introduce a rule that you can come out of that at a point of your choosing into another agreement as long as it's equivalent. One of the things we're working on is making that a bit more simple and straightforward, because how do you define equivalence? You could spend 4 months on the farm checking it all out. Like at the most, obviously we're not going to do that, but you could have a really sort of extreme pernickety way of interpreting that, or a more pragmatic way of interpreting it. And we're looking at how we can streamline that and make it work for people. We've made it so that you can end your HLS at a point of your choosing. So it used to be the case that if it finished in February, you'd have a big long gap before you went into CS in January. But now, because of the way the rolling windows work, you'll be able to go straight from one to the other. We're just coming to the end of a bit of a task and finish piece of work to work out what else can we do to make this easy for people, either to do some of the things that are available in CS and SFI alongside HLS, or to just move wholesale into a new agreement. If you're the other aspect of this question, that's HLS. And what's really important here is we don't want anybody to feel like they're disadvantaged or being left behind in any way. We want everybody to have maximum access to the things that are on offer. And that's in the interest of farmers to generate the income. And it's also in the interest of us achieving all of those outcomes that I mentioned earlier, because we really want people to participate. So we don't want any bureaucratic hurdles in the way. So whenever we see those, we try and get them out of the way as much as we possibly can. So we've done some of that on HLS, but we're just having a look now to see what else can we do this year to make that work more easily. And we think equivalence is the first one, and the process for moving from one to the next could be smoother, and we're working on that too. And then if you're in CS now and you want to get access to these new options, you've got two ways of doing that. You can either, and your agreement doesn't finish this year, you can either add on an extra agreement along the sides, do some extra things, or you can move from one to the other if that's what you want to do. And again, we're beginning to see increased demand for that. And that's a great sign from our perspective, because it means people are seeing the new offer as attractive and something that they want to do. But we've got to make that process really smooth for people. So we're also doing a piece of work now we have already started to see demand for this. But what we want to do is make sure that that's really smooth for everybody. It's absolutely clear how to do it over the course of this year. So as we open that offer, we'll also make it really clear how you'll be able to do that. And then the idea is, at the moment, you can amend your SFI agreement once a year. We're going to expand that to also cover all of the scope that's in CS mid-tier as well. And you'll also be able to continue to have additional agreements on the side if that's what you want to do. So this is all about sort of trying to offer maximum flexibility with minimum complexity, because sometimes when you make it flexible, what you accidentally do is introduce more complexity, and we don't want to do that. So we're always trying to sort of move forward on both of those two fronts, simplify it and make it more flexible at the same time. And that is an ongoing quest. So I definitely do not think we can declare ourselves done on that one yet. But we have made some progress, but there's more to do. If you're in a particular, one other thing to say, sorry about that, I'll try and do shorter answers. The one specific thing to say about that is, if you've got a concern about your particular situation, the best thing to do is contact RPA and ask them what to do, because for each particular situation, there'll be a slightly different route forward depending on what it is that you exactly that you want to do. So please do contact RPA if you're in any doubt or you're worried about what particularly you're going to be able to do and how to do it.
Good. You actually preempted my next question, which is very helpful, which was, if I am a farmer watching this webinar and I'm thinking, actually, this stuff looks better than what I'm doing, both in terms of environmental delivery, but also the payment rates. I know that I won't be able to necessarily make an application until the summer, but I want to get ahead. Maybe it's a quiet time for some people and they want to start looking at, these actions will go on these parcels. Now is a good time to do that, but they should also be contacting the RPA to kind of flag up their interest and see what their next steps will be.
Yeah, they can do if they've got questions. I mean, the thing to do, I would say, there's an offer available now at SFI with 23 actions in it. If there are any of those that you want to do, then crack on and get into that scheme, because the sooner you get in, the sooner you're going to start getting paid. So if you enter the scheme, you'll start it on the 1st of the month after you accept the agreement, and then you'll start getting paid in your 4th month. So you'll get paid quarterly. So just after the end of the 3rd month, you'll get your first payment. So the sooner you get in, the sooner you'll get that payment. And then you'll be able to add in new actions as and when they're available, either waiting for your anniversary and adding them in at that point, or if you really want to do it sooner than that and you fancy having multiple agreements and you're into that sort of complexity, then you can have an extra one along the side. It's up to you. I should say, by the way, we want to get to a point where you don't have to where you can amend your agreement anytime you like, but that is complicated and we don't want to run before we can walk. We've introduced a lot more flexibility in recent times, and we've got to make sure that's working and solid and stable for everybody, and then we can carry on adding more flexibility as we go. So that's the kind of direction of travel, really.
Yeah, it's making me think of, maybe not this audience, but people talking about joining gyms in the new year, and you have to either commit to an all-inclusive gym where you do swim, gym and classes, or you can do, okay, I think I want to do the gym initially, but maybe I want to start doing classes in a bit.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that kind of change. Okay, thank you. Right, I think we have actually addressed the top couple. The next one down actually is a bit more broad reaching, hopefully quite a short answer, but can you explain the difference between SFI and countryside stewardship, and why can't there just be one scheme with different options within that?
Yeah, good question. And I don't know whether it's the individual that posted that question, but there is one individual in particular who's been saying this for ages, and he's right. He's called Richard, but there are others as well. You're right, actually, we should do that, and that's what we're going to do this summer. So we're going to have a combined offer for everything that's currently available in mid-tier, and SFI will be available through a single service. You'll be able to have a single agreement and see it all in the same place and not have to have the hassle of 2 different agreements. What will remain separate is higher tier agreements, which are a bespoke competitive process. But one of the things we're trying to do is make some of the actions that have only been available through higher tier special agreements much more widely available through the sort of approach Jonathan was just talking about, where if you want to do a particular action, like creating some particular type of habitat alongside all of the rest of your SFI type agreement, then you ought to have access to that, and you shouldn't have to have a fully bespoke agreement just to be able to do that. So we've got some ways to be able to increase access to those actions. But yes, I think that is a fair point, and all of the evidence that we've seen in the last couple of years suggests that that person saw it before we did. Thank you very much for telling us. We did listen, and we've acted on what you've had to say, more slowly than you would have liked, I know, but as you have often said on the Farming Forum, we would get there. Well, we have now. There you go.
Hope Richard's happy. Okay, thank you very much. And again, we're kind of covering off more than one question in these answers, which is ideal. So the top one on the list there, I think we've just covered. If someone wants to transfer between from CS to FFI, they don't have to do both in this new rollout.
Yes.
It can be combined.
Yeah, you can transfer from one to the other. The requirement is that you need to do something that's equivalent in SFI. And like I said, we're looking at how we can make that a really straightforward process and easy for everybody to manage. So you will be able to transfer across, or you'll be able to have a new agreement. If you're transferring, you're more likely to need to do it on the anniversary of your agreement, because the agreements are kind of a year. So it's up to each farmer to decide what they want to do. If you're in a hurry, have another agreement. If you don't mind waiting and it's more important to you to just have one agreement and do it all in one go, then you can transfer instead. That's up to you.
Good stuff. Okay, thank you. Jonathan, this next one might be for you about agroforestry options. You didn't cover it in your slides. I'm not expecting you to have a slide up your sleeve, but we can certainly put the links into the chat. Can you give us an overview of what that will look like, payment rates, definitions, etc.?
Yeah, it's a good point. And with hindsight, we probably should have had a slide about it. So first of all, why are we doing agroforestry? And the simple answer is we need more trees in our farm landscape if we're going to get near our climate targets in particular. And there are other benefits to trees. It's not just carbon. Now, historically, and this was sort of enshrined within EU law, there was agricultural land and there was woodland and forestry, and never the twain shall meet. Agroforestry blurs that line. So agroforestry is about integrating trees within the farming operation. There are some bits of regulation that we need to dance around here, which are important because it sets out why we need the different densities of trees, so many trees per hectare for low, medium and high. First of all, if you create woodland, then you need to go through a whole set of processes regarding environmental impact assessments. The Forestry Commission need to be involved, etc., etc. And the definition of woodland, depending on the pattern of trees are being planted, it's roughly around 100 stems per hectare gets you into your creating woodland. So there will be higher tier versions of agroforestry that are operating at above 100 trees per hectare. But we also want to make this available to people without having to go through all of that process. So there will also be agroforestry offers that operate at below 100 trees per hectare, and they will sit within SFI. There are also particularly sensitive areas or particularly sensitive habitats. So for example, if you're in a national park where landscape is incredibly important, or if it's potentially species-rich grassland or there's archaeology, then there's going to need to be some input from an advisor. The final bit of this is, and I know we've had a question, so I'll try and cover it off now. Well, what's the difference between agroforestry and wood pasture? Wood pasture is a particular habitat type. It's that habitat consists of both the trees and the grassland that's operating, that the trees are on. So a wood pasture option, in much the same way as a species-rich grassland option, the whole parcel goes into that action, and the requirements cover both the grazing and the management of the trees. That's wood pasture. Agroforestry is an action that will be stackable on normal agricultural land, and what you're doing between those trees in an agroforestry system, you may be growing wheat, and you would be eligible, if you meet the requirements, to do the nil insecticide, or you could do your cover crops, your pollen and nectar mix, or you can graze, plant herbal lays, legume-rich grassland. So agroforestry is more stackable, and you can be doing essentially what you like between those trees, whereas wood pasture is a sort of what we would call a whole system, a whole parcel. It's not stackable by and large with other actions.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. And I can see that Becky has just posted the link through to the actions for agroforestry in the chat there, which have the payments. It looks, just having a quick glance through, like they vary from about 250 per hectare for low density up to about 850 for high density. Do we know what definition low, medium and density is yet, or is that an announcement that's going to be coming out later in the year?
It's an announcement to come, but it'll be based around the number of stems per hectare.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to switch over to the farming forum list. Excuse my looking away from the screen, but I've got you on another screen. Come back to the higher tier countryside stewardship, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
When will it begin? I know we haven't got specific dates, but the follow-up question is, will it be by invite only with year-round windows, or will the application process be different?
Thank you for the question. So it will be open in the summer at the same time as the rest of the offer, and it will be a rolling application window rather than a short application window. And there's two reasons for that. One, it's easier and more useful for farmers and land managers if you can apply at the time of your choosing. But secondly, it means we can manage a bigger volume because we can manage them over the course of the year instead of having one peak. And you need everybody to do all the work at that peak time of year, which means you've got to kind of limit on how many applications you can process. And one of the things that we've said we're going to do is double our capacity to process higher tier applications, because we know more people want to come in than we're currently allowing. So we'll start in the summer. There'll be a rolling application window. It's not invite only. So Natural England do specifically engage with people that they think have got suitable land and suitable ambition to come into higher tier, and they do go and do that outreach and engagement, and that's the right thing for them to do, I think, because they've got particular objectives that they're trying to meet in respect of protected sites, for example. However, that doesn't mean you can't apply on spec if you want to. We did have applications last year that were successful from people who had not been invited but had decided they wanted to apply. I think the thing we've got to make better here is three things. Number one, if you want to do some actions that are more complex or ambitious, that doesn't necessarily mean you need a fully bespoke agreement with a whole lot of bespoke, and you need to go into the competitive scheme. So as I said earlier, we want to make more of those actions available through the mainstream offer, and you can just get advice on those specific things or endorsement on those specific things to be able to get your agreement, rather than the whole lot having to be bespoke. The second thing is allowing more people to get in where what they need is a bespoke agreement. And then the third thing is, if they're not successful in a competition to get into higher tier, that shouldn't be a dead end and a wasted effort. So we want to be able to, like, if somebody wants to do stuff and it's suitable to do on their land, we want them to do it. We don't want to have bureaucratic barriers to that. So those three aspects, kind of increasing our ability to take applications where that is the most appropriate type of agreement to have, making the actions more widely available where you don't need a fully bespoke agreement, and then providing a route forward in a smooth way for people who thought they were going into higher tier but actually need to go into a different offer. All those things combined should take the sort of rough edges off this process and make it more accessible to people. And higher tier was conceived as a sort of niche, competitive, highly ambitious scheme. at a time when we weren't trying to get absolutely maximum uptake because we couldn't have afforded it in the budget, because most of the budget was being spent on basic payments. Now, what we're trying to do is maximise uptake of all the schemes, and we really want to attract people into these higher ambition schemes, and we don't want to have any bureaucratic barriers to it, and that's why we're shifting the approach in that way. So it'll be this summer. We'll confirm the dates as soon as we possibly can, because I realise summer is a season, not a date, and that's not the most helpful if you're trying to make a plan. I just don't want to promise a date now that I'm not yet ready to do. I'd rather say a date when we've got all of the arrangements in place around it, and we must be able to stick to it when we set it. So we're not quite ready to do that, but we will be shortly, and we'll do that as soon as we can.
Okay, thank you. Related question, which also picks up, Jonathan, on your point about the possibility of needing a visit if high priority habitat isn't mapped. Someone has asked, can we assume similar entry criteria for options and actions like species rich grassland, arable reversion, orchards needing improvement? That's orchards needing approval. I think the question there is around, if it's not already mapped but you have it and you want to put it into a scheme, will there be a similar, will the criteria for those things be similar to current CS options, and will the process for approval be the same, sending somebody out to have a look?
So it's likely to be similar. The process itself is likely to be similar. So somebody coming out to have a look. The mechanisms, both front of house and behind the house, may change a little bit. There may be some efficiencies we can bring to that. The criteria, if there are existing actions, there may be a few changes. A lot of the work we've done this year is trying to make them more available in more situations, and there might be adjustments to eligibility criteria, but those will be specific to the particular action. So obviously the criteria for species rich grassland will be very different to an orchard, for example.
Yeah, I think that they took that as a given.
We'll be publishing all of that in the details of that in due course. This isn't going to be sort of hidden behind the scenes. We want everybody to be quite clear what they can and can't do.
Great, thank you. And this is working very well, but all of the questions are kind of linking together, which is great. The top one on Slido now is, will you be recruiting more Natural England staff? I know that CSF had a big increase in their CSFOs last year, and some of those guys do this kind of thing when it's an option that requires CSF approval. Yeah, what's the stance on that?
So Natural England are in charge of how many staff they recruit, and I don't set their kind of budgets or recruitment targets. However, we do work together to work out how can we make most effective use of the capability that they have. And so some of the things that we can do from DEFRA on that are not having requirements for Natural England to endorse things where that's not actually the most useful use of their time, because what Natural England want to do is be able to really target their efforts where it's going to have the most impact, either because it's the highest risk area or the most complex or high ambition activity, or it's aligned to their statutory responsibilities with regard to protected sites. So we can facilitate that through the design of schemes. And part of what we can do there is to say, well, actually, this particular thing, does it have to be any that endorse it, or could it be somebody else with the relevant qualification? And so we can broaden out, and actually that helps channel more, that helps support the kind of ecosystem of the sector as well, doesn't it? If we're kind of enabling that wider use of expertise, and it means that farmers don't have to rely on, we're not kind of constrained by Natural England's level of capacity in any particular area in quite the same way. So from our perspective in the programme, what we're trying to do is make sure that we're not putting in place requirements that excessively put a burden on Natural England, so that they can target their efforts and we make wider use of that expertise. And then I know Natural England are working on learning from the catchment sensitive farming offer, which has been popular relative to lots of other offers. That's quite a popular offer with farmers, and we often hear feedback to say, oh, these folk turn up and they do actually get farming, and they can actually point me towards sources of funding and useful things like that. They're not just coming with a clipboard to kind of inspect me, but they are actually trying to help me. And so I know NE and actually EA and RPA have been looking at how can we learn from that approach to broaden it out to cover a wider range of topics and to take that sort of pragmatic, helpful approach more broadly as well. So there's this kind of targeting and how the advice and the consent's offered. And then the final thing is, we're always looking to improve business processes within and between the bodies that are involved here, so Forestry Commission, Natural England, EA and RPA in particular. And we host a sort of forums for those bodies to talk to each other about, well, if you're giving a grant for slurry over here, there's not much use of you over here, refusing to give consent for it, for example, and try and have that conversation to smooth the way. And we're all about trying to streamline and simplify and make things work better, basically, for people. And that again is an ongoing quest. I wish I could wave a magic wand and make all of those things work better immediately, but I'm not able to do that. But we are able to carry on, just keep pushing every day to make things a bit better here and a bit better there, make the odd leap forward, and over time we get to a better position is the idea. So you should be seeing signs of that, and you will see more signs of it over the next few years, because we shan't rest till we're done.
Good to hear. Thank you. Right, this next one's a bit of a curveball. I certainly don't know the answer, and it may be that it needs to be referred to one of our RPA or other colleagues, but I'll ask the question, and you are full of hidden wisdom, so we shall see. Has DEFRA liaised with HMRC, and will they confirm that land in SFI is classified as agricultural farming for the purposes of IH2, which I think is inheritance tax?
Yes, it is. Yeah, it is inheritance tax. Great. So we have liaised with Treasury. Treasury lead on tax issues. So they ran a consultation last year about this question. They've been digesting the responses. They do, of course, talk to DEFRA, because all these decisions are made across government, because it's tax, it is a Treasury issue. So you should expect Treasury at some point in due course to come out with their response to that consultation. We're aware that there are some issues around this, and government are aware and Treasury are aware, but I can't comment on it in the sense of giving the answer, because that's up to Treasury, and they will do that in due course.
Okay, thank you.
If you, by the way, though, I should say, so the definition is about if you're doing farming. So a lot of the stuff in SFI is clearly farming. So just because of what I've just said, there's been a consultation, like there is an existing set of rules around this. The question is, how wide does the definition of agriculture go, and can it include the sort of actions where you're actually taking land out of production for a period of time, or changing the land use? And that's what the consultation's about, and that's the bit that Treasury are going to opine on. If you're in doubt, get some advice from your tax advisor or any other sort of advisor about your particular situation. I obviously can't advise on individual tax issues.
No, I don't think anybody expects you to be giving that kind of personalised advice. Okay, next one. Again, very popular. We've got lots that are getting significant upvotes. What is the purpose of needing to update land use now that BPS has gone? One common issue when applying for SFI is incompatible land cover or land use.
Yeah, that's a right pain, we know. It was the best way we had to deal with the issue of what land is eligible for which actions for the SFI when we opened the 2023 offer last year. But we have been looking at how we can make that better and less complicated for people. So you should expect to see improvements on that in the 2024 offer. I can't say what they are yet because I don't know, but we're well aware that that's a pain for people, and that there must surely be a better way of doing it. And so that's what we're looking at. So it might not be perfect this year, but it is definitely on our agenda to make that better. The reason we have it is because we need to establish that the land is eligible for the action that you are going to undertake on it. So we need to know, if you've got an orchard, we don't really want to pay you for species rich grassland instead of an orchard, or vice versa. So we need to have some way of assessing what type of land it is and what is on it, and therefore is it appropriate to do this action on it. But we definitely, I would accept that this is not a very simple way of doing it, and we have it on our agenda to make it better.
Oh, this next question, I've heard you comment on it before, and I'm loath to ask it, but people want to know the answer, although
that's okay, fire away.
Proviso that you do not have a crystal ball.
No, if only I did.
How future-proof are schemes with changes in government expected this year?
Yeah, so I'm not a politician, obviously. I'm a civil servant, and I'm not in charge of what any future government might decide they want to do. What I would say, though, is we have a solid, I think, agreed in government planning position, which is that we expect what we're building to endure. And that seems like a reasonable expectation, given that all of the main political parties are saying that that's what they would do. And the debate seems to be around who would do the best job, how much money would they apply to this, where would they focus their efforts, where do they think things are not yet where they should be, etc. And so if you look at the Oxford Farming Conference speeches, for example, that's what they were saying. And so my expectation at this stage, based on the information I have available to me, is that we will be carrying on rolling out these ELM schemes in broadly the shape they're in now. But there is always, what we're trying to do with these schemes is we're not trying to do them as a project that's then done and go, well, that's finished then. Because if we do that, whatever happens, we will be in a position at some point where they're now out of date and not working well for everybody. Because what we've got to do is make them into continuously improving schemes. And as part of that, they've got to be able to flex, not just to changes in political priorities, which will happen within the same party or different parties, as we've seen over time, but also things that we learn from science, things that we learn from feedback from our customers, things that we see actually happening on the ground in terms of, do these things actually work or not? So we've got to make them flexible. So what we tend to assume is the broad architecture now is pretty stable, but we will carry on evolving it over time in an increasingly orderly way. So we'll be coming out of the major change period and into continuous improvement, and that we need to be able to flex in that way. And there shouldn't be sort of major dramatic changes. We should be able to accommodate those within the architecture. But as I say, I'm not a politician. It's up to everybody on the call who they vote for, and it's up to those people who are voted for to decide what they think the political direction is. And it's my job to advise on that and implement it for whoever the government of the day is. So that's what we will do, isn't it, Jonathan?
Absolutely.
Well, if you do ever decide to run, Janet, you suspect that you would get a number of
I would not touch that with an absolute barge pole, but thank you very much for the kind comment. I'm very happy being a humble functionary.
I think that's probably a wise choice. So question around kind of clarification from RPA and delays in responses. Obviously, some of that will be because the responses just aren't available yet. I've already shared the link through to the how to contact the RPA with specific queries, phone, email, and query form. But the nature of the fact that people can apply for all sorts of different things is likely to mean that they're going to be receiving an increasingly wide range of potentially complex queries.
Yes.
What, if any, is the approach to ensuring that the RPA continue to be able to develop so that they can manage all of those queries in the best way?
Yeah, so I don't run the RPA, but I do work in very close partnership with them, as does everybody in the programme. And so there's a lot we can do in the team that I am responsible for to make sure that what we're offering is clear and workable, and that we roll it out in a sensible way that gives RPA colleagues time to get their heads around it before it's launched and they're expected to answer questions about it. I think it's fair to say that there's been huge improvement, I think the RPA would be able to point to, in the RPA's performance in terms of making payments, responding to queries, getting agreements out. They're getting agreements out really very quickly on SFI now. And I think it's fair also to say that what the change we've brought about in the design of the schemes is huge and fundamental. So we used to have schemes with very specific prescriptions. So if you ran the RPA, they could read out the relevant prescription to you. We now have flexible schemes, and although that's something that farmers have asked us for, and it's, I think, overwhelmingly a benefit to the sector, and that's why the schemes are more attractive, because of the way we've managed controls historically, a lot of people see that flexibility as risk because they're worried that we've got some secret rules somewhere, and if we get it wrong, they're going to get fined and we're going to kind of come down on them like a ton of bricks. We're not going to do that. If you like deliberately don't do anything at all or kind of destroy your natural environment, then you should expect somebody to notice that and do something about it. But in general terms, everybody's trying to be more flexible and more pragmatic and all that kind of thing, and it is going to take time to become really, really effective in managing that. And I think if we want that change, we have to be prepared to accept that if you ring them up wanting to know a prescription, you're not going to get one, because we don't do that anymore, and we don't want to be backed into every time we get asked a question writing down a prescription. So what RPA colleagues have got to do is a very different task now, and that worry drives people to want something that we're not bluntly going to give them, because we're not going to say, here's the prescription. We're going to say, do the right thing for your farm. And we've got to prove that the controls that go with that are indeed pragmatic and fair and proportionate. And I think, in fairness to RPA colleagues, they're being in this instance, like that, you could blame them for not giving the prescription, and actually that's me, that's not by RPA, that's ministers and DEFRA that have decided not to make it prescriptive. So I think I can't speak for the RPA, but I'm sure if they were here, they would say, we are working really hard on this. and we really want to offer this pragmatic, proportionate, flexible service. Do we think it's perfect yet? No. Are we going to carry on working on it to make it really, really as best as it can possibly be? Absolutely, we are. And if you have a specific concern, then do keep getting in touch with them and escalate it until you get it resolved, because obviously nobody wants to have people confused or not getting the answers that they need.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I know I have part of a monthly forum with Sandy, who runs part of the show, and I know that his priority is very aligned with yours in terms of making it pain-free, as taking on board constructive criticism and challenges.
That's absolutely right.
Really responding to those difficulties.
Yeah, and you'll see RPA along with the programme, hand in hand, out and about all agriculture shows and events and auction marts and farm visits and all that kind of thing. And there's a new customer director, Marie Hardeman, who arrived last year, who is specifically tasked with like really improving customer service and building on all the great work that's already there and taking it forward to make sure that it aligns with the intent of making these schemes flexible and pragmatic. So that is all, everybody is committed in the same direction. Absolutely nothing that any of us are doing is perfect yet. Probably will never be, but hopefully it'll get better and better over time, and that's what we're all trying to do.
Thank you. Oh, this is an interesting one. Okay, so this person, it's a question from the farming forum, but it's very popular on Slido as well, around what is considered proof of achieving aims. So I suppose it's a bit of a double-sided question. One is, are there options where what kind of proof will be required as evidence that you're doing what you've agreed to do? And yeah, how will that be collected or requested as part of the kind of agreement assessment?
Good question. So the answer is enough to show what you've done and that you've done it. That is basically the answer. You judge what enough looks like. But Jonathan, do you want to say a bit more about that?
I can add a little bit. So for those that aren't aware, AHL2 is winter bird food in arable land. So what we will be expecting to see over those winter months, that we've got sources of seed available, particularly small seeds for farmland birds, and then in the spring and summer some flowering taking place of those crops, those plants in those plots. In terms of taking photographs of each plot, it's useful to have. Everybody's got a camera on the phone these days as you're wandering around or undertaking your normal activities. Take photos. Actually, even short videos can tell a better story, and just keep those either on your phone or set a folder up on your computer and move them over, and just have them. And if nothing else, it's a useful record for yourself of how things are changing, what lessons you can learn, this one looks particularly good compared to that one, what did I do different? So it's a learning resource for yourself.
And also, I think a lot of the things we're asking you to keep are things you would ordinarily be keeping anyway. So you're probably going to keep your receipts and your records of sowing and drilling and whatever, aren't you? So like, this is not a huge overhead on top of what you're already doing. Just take a few snaps while you're at it, is what we're basically saying.
Yeah.
But I can understand what I suspect what's driving that question is exactly the issue I was just talking about before, which is it is going to take some time to get to show everybody in a consistent, enduring way the change in the way controls are managed. So, because this is not about, well, you must take exactly 12 photographs on this particular date. It's about keep enough evidence to show that you've had a good crack at it and you've done something that was sensible to try and achieve the aim, and we'll have a sensible conversation about it. But that I can say that till I'm blue in the face, and so can RPA, but you have got to see it in an enduring, consistent way over time, haven't you? And we do appreciate that and respect it. And so we're not trying to be cute when we kind of go, oh, it's up to you. We're trying to kind of go through this hump of building the trust in the way that we want to operate, because the prize is so important. If we can get there and we can get to a proper business-like relationship where people don't feel like they're being caught out and penalised and kind of hung out to dry, but they feel like we're trying to work with them and support them and have a business-like relationship with them, that's such a big prize. And I've lost count of the number of farmers that have told me how much they'd like to see that, but how little faith they have that we can actually get there. And so I think it's really important to recognise if it's not driving that particular question, it's drives a lot of others, and we do know that, and we recognise it, and we've got to just keep going and show that we're serious.
What I'll just add to what Janet's just said is, when we were in the EU, the sort of what was driving all of this was fraud and error. And if something wasn't absolutely right, then you need to apply a penalty, because that would, frighten, stop people doing it wrong.
And to be clear, just when you say what's driving it is fraud and error, it's the perception of risk of fraud and error, not that we were seeing high levels of fraud or error, but we had a very close definition of what they were, and we were required to very closely guard it. I think that's the thing, isn't it?
And the thinking behind that was that would, if you like, frighten people into doing it right. Well, what it did was frighten people away from schemes for a start.
Yeah,
so the new approach is very much, if things aren't quite right, what we all want is these agreements to work. We want these actions to work. So the approach is going to be supporting everybody involved to get these agreements to work, so we all get what we need for both our businesses as farmers, but also for the natural environment.
So that's why we have flexible schemes and flexible proportionate controls that go with them. That's where we're trying to get to. But I think we've got to recognise the negative impact that era had on the sector's confidence in all of us. And so we recognise that, we take on the chin, and we are working hard to try and turn that around. And that's the most difficult, and it's probably going to take the longest to get right, but it's actually the most important part of what we're doing here in terms of the reforms we're trying to bring about. Because if we don't get that right, this isn't going to work for everybody.
It comes down to trust, doesn't it? I think lots of the conversations I've had with people about the new schemes, people want them to work, but there needs to be trust in both sides.
Yeah, and the thing about trust is, my favourite saying about trust is that it arrives on foot and leaves on horseback. So
that one.
And that's what happens. So it's not easy to build trust, because one cock up and you're back to square one. It's a snakes and ladders kind of situation, to mix my metaphors, isn't it? But we've got to keep going.
Right, let's pick up the next one, which is a little bit more technical. And Jonathan, I think probably one for you. Oh, they're moving around. Right, I'll do the agroforestry one, and then there's one on IPM4 as well. Agroforestry, there's been news of the annual maintenance payments. There's been no mention of capital payments for creation. I know from working on other things that there are lots of other creation payment options, but within this scheme, are there going to be, or is the expectation that comes from elsewhere?
There will be capital payments for planting trees for agroforestry. So the details of that will be published shortly. It's likely to be a similar type of process that you go through for if you want to apply for a capital grant to plant a hedge or etc.
And we'll put all the prices for that when we do the full scheme information.
Lovely. Okay, thank you. And the next one down may also be for you, please, Jonathan. Is IPM4 an action for the whole year or for a cropping year? So whole year, I think, means calendar year.
We know there's been a lot of confusion around all of this, and we've been working with the RPA to resolve it. We'll be publishing more information shortly. It makes, and I'm sort of tipping you the wink if you like, it makes sense to apply for a crop, not particularly, rather than an agreement year, etc., etc.
Okay. This is a product of having rolling windows, and as we do this, we see issues emerge like this, and what we try to do is pick up specific issues like that where we think, actually, that is a fair point, we need to clarify the guidance on that, and clarify it without making amendments to the guidance every single time anybody asks a question. I mean, the whole thing being chaos. So we think we've got to do some clarification on that point, because we know that there's worry about it and worry about doing it wrong, and therefore people are thinking, oh gosh, I won't go into that then, and we don't want that. So we will issue some clarification on it to make sure it's workable. And as Jonathan's dropped a fairly massive hint about what direction we think we're going in there, rightly, because it's got to fit with your farming rotation, hasn't it?
I'm just double checking back onto the Q&A from the Farming Forum before we pick up another couple of slides. I think we've probably got questions. Time for 2 or 3 more questions before we do the wrap up. So if you've
done a good number, I think that's not a bad number of questions, is it?
I like to blast through them, for remembering previous things.
I'll have to have a lie down after this, I think. Go on, what's next?
Cup of coffee. Okay, I think actually a lot of the Farming Forum ones are also picked up in the Slido, so we'll continue to work down. Coming back to the integration between Countryside and SFI as one agreement. will that have an impact? I'll just read it verbatim. When countryside stewardship and SFI become one agreement, how will the different agreement lengths for different options work?
So broadly speaking, as it works now, so you can have in a countryside stewardship agreement, you can have some actions that are 5 years and some that are 10. So you need to do you have an agreement that contains all those actions. And then you do the ones that are 5 years for 5 years and the ones that are 10 years for 10. And then if you want to get some more 5-year actions at that point, then you can do that. So it'll be a sort of, we're looking at these things as sort of fiendish technical questions. As soon as you start pulling at them, there's actually quite a lot of complexities to them. And we'll publish details about exactly how it will work when we publish the scheme information. But broadly speaking, you'll have an agreement and it will have the things in it that you're going to do for that period of time. And let's say you've got an agreement that's got some 5-year or 10-year things in it and some 3-year things in it, then when those 3-year things run out, then you can apply for some more 3-year things to replace them and add those in. So it'll be a bit more like a sort of rolling agreement, really, and you'll just keep adding actions in as the old ones expire, or you want to upgrade them. There was a question about upgrading. You might want to upgrade, for example, from low input grassland to species rich grassland, and we'd love you to do that. So you want to make that possible for you year by year as well. So it's much less, I've signed up to this thing and I'm now stuck with it for the next 5 years and I can't add, subtract or adjust it really in any way unless something dramatic happens, to I've got this thing, I'm starting here, but I might add this bit here or this bit run out and I'll replace it with something else, or I might want to upgrade or whatever, and you can do that. Because I was talking to a farmer, a dairy farmer who is very, like, he's really into his schemes. And he was saying he does 10-year schemes. So really he's only going to have maximum 3 probably times to decide what he's going to do in his entire farming, in his whole farming career before he hands it on to his son. And that's mad, because he's learning new things every year about what he wants to do. And he's wanting to kind of evolve like he does his farming practice. And so we really want to go with the grain there. We know people would like to be able to do more within that period. So it'll be an agreement with whatever lengths of action you've got in it, and you'll be able to flex over time to replace the ones as they run out, basically.
And what I'll just add to what Janet's just said, as we look at bringing mid-tier and SFI together, there will also be opportunities, I suspect, for some of those mid-tier actions that are currently 5 years to turn them into 3-year actions. Not in every case, but that we can start to align things in that way as well.
Yeah, and one of the things we're going to do is offer more actions on a 3-year basis, because that works much better for people who are either just dipping their toe in and don't want to make a full 5-year commitment, or have a tenancy agreement that isn't going to run for 5 years, but they're more comfortable committing for 3. So we'll be doing that as well this year.
Great. Okay, I'm going to make this the last question because there are a couple of bits of information that I and the DEFRA team would like to share at the end. It might be a short one, it might not, it's difficult to tell at the moment. Will orchard creation options be available to all?
I can pick that one up. So we are expanding the eligibility for orchards. So it's for creation, there's either going to need to be some evidence that there was an orchard there in the past, perhaps old maps or whatever, or where we are expanding some existing woodland or creating links between different tree habitats. So will that make it available to everybody? I'm sure there'll be some people that are excluded from that, but equally it will be far more available than it's been in the past.
Okay, great, thank you. I am going to bring things to a close here. So first would be thank you very much for all of those numbers that we're still at, still close to 1,000 people who have been on. I think we peaked at about 1,200. So fantastic to have you all online today. Of course, thank you, Janet and Jonathan, for your fantastic presentations and answering as many questions as we could get through. We'll also send up a follow-up email probably next week now with a link to the recording if anyone wants to watch it back or share it. And also from a farming advice service perspective, a link to registration for our next webinar, which is, I'm just moving my slides along because the details are on there, which is scheduled for the 21st of February, where we'll still be talking about SFI, but with a team from the Farm Resilience Fund and about approaching SFI applications, and also looking at combining support from other schemes, because there's a lot of stuff that's accessible at the moment, and we're keen to make sure that everybody knows about it and has access to it. As I mentioned before, the RPA and the DEFRA teams are going to review the list of all the questions that we've had. If we haven't picked them up and there is an answer available, then those will all be collated and shared on the DEFRA blog and the farming forum, and we will share those through the FAS newsletter, which comes out at the end of the month, so that's next week. Janet, you did also touch on it, but just also to flag, if you would like to have a chat with RPA and DEFRA colleagues in person rather than reaching out through a digital forum, they're all over the place this year. They're trying to get out to as many events and actually have face-to-face conversations with people as much as possible. So again, the link in the chat in the Talk to Us in 2024 page. I understand that there'll be a new list of events being added on there very shortly for the spring, summer, possibly even looking forward to autumn and winter of this year. So if you are the kind of person who plans your diary way in advance, you'll be able to do that. And without further ado, we are 1 minute over. So thank you very much for your patience. And I'll just say thanks for joining us again and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody. And thanks, Laura.
Thanks.